Hey everyone, welcome to Rants, Rides, and Reviews. My name's JP, and today in this video, we are taking the top 3 rides at Universal Orlando and putting them against the top 3 rides at Walt Disney World. We're going to see which ride is the best ride in Orlando and who has the upper hand in the theme park wars. Let's go. Before we get started, I've made 2 other videos ranking Universal rides and Disney World rides in Orlando. I recommend watching those before watching this one because I'm picking the top rides from each of those videos and putting them against each other in this one. You can click the link right here if you want to watch those. Also, I'm a new channel, so any love you could show and throw my way by subscribing or liking this video would be very much appreciated. I'm trying something different in this video. I want to be as objective as possible, so I'm going to be looking at 3 different criteria when ranking each ride. The first is thrill, and then thematic and immersive experience, and then personal preference. I'm going to give each ride a number in each category out of 10, 10 being the highest, and then add up the overall score at the end. The highest number wins. Now, with all that out of the way, let's dive in. And we'll kick it off with Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. Now let's talk thrill. This ride has a backwards launch, 360-degree rotating vehicle, small drops, and a slapping soundtrack as you travel back in time with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, I haven't rode this one personally, but I've heard it's more intense than Space Mountain, but not as intense as Rock and Roller Coaster. So I'll give it a 6 because of the backwards launch and the spinning elements. Now, in terms of theming, the queue for this ride starts out in a Galaxarium, which is just a planetarium for the galaxy. And then you go into a museum type area where it shows you some artifacts from Xander, which is a planet that the first Guardians of the Galaxy takes place in. Then during the pre-show, they do that effect where they teleport you onto a ship and the room changes. It's a pretty cool effect. I do appreciate the idea of it still being a pavilion still. This was known before as the Energy Pavilion, and they still try to keep true to that original theme as much as possible. Terry Crews is in this ride. He's just a weird choice in my opinion. I don't think he's that good of an actor. All I see when I look at him is the Old Spice commercials, and it kind of takes me out of the ride. Also, this attraction has a lot of screens. Like every time you see somebody, it's always through some type of screen, which I get. It's hard to do. It's hard to bring people in physically, but Universal always gets all the hate for being screen heavy, and so I think we should hold Disney to the same standard that we do Universal. And lastly, it's themed well, but it's just not a super interesting theme, if that makes sense. Like, the theme is it takes place in space, and we already have a ton of space rides at Disney World. And so while it looks cool, it's just not the most interesting, if that makes sense. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 in terms of theming. And lastly, personal preference. Like I said before, I haven't been on this ride, so I can't give you my honest thoughts on it. But I have watched a ton of POVs. I've got in a lot of theme park reviewers' opinions on it. And a lot of them say that it's the best ride at Walt Disney World. A lot of them say it's the best ride in Epcot. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, which I think is fair. All right, let's move on to Rise of the Resistance. While there isn't a whole lot of physical thrill to this ride at first glance, there's a lot of danger, I guess, that's happening in this ride. For example, you're being broken out of the interrogation room by the Resistance, being shot at by stormtroopers, dodging these guns, being chased by Kylo Ren. Like, there's a lot that happens in this ride. The only thing that's physically thrilling would be this free fall drop that you do and like crash landing on a planet, which is cool, but it's not super intense. So I think it's more of a family attraction. So I'll give this ride a 5 out of 10 for thrill. For theming, however, this ride should be one of the attractions that engineers study in college when learning about theming. You walk in these caves, and as you go deeper and deeper in the caves, you find the Resistance base, and then you see this hologram of Rey asking you to help on the mission, and then you leave the planet. You get tractor beamed by stormtroopers in the First Order. A bunch of crazy stuff happens. There's a ton of live actors, a ton of animatronics. Everything is extremely immersive. and I haven't even like talked about the ride itself. So it's like a 20-minute experience from top to bottom, and I won't get into all of it and describe shot for shot, but from start to finish, you are just caught up in this adventure, and so I got to give it a 10 out of 10 easily. And then for personal preference, how much do I like this ride? Well, for those of you who watched my last Disney video, you know I'm not a super huge fan of what Disney has done with Star Wars, so that does knock it down a tad bit. But even with my love of Star Wars waning, I would ride this ride just for the story and the theming and the immersion. So I'll give it a 8 out of 10 for personal preference. Let's move on to Flight of Passage over at Animal Kingdom. Now, in terms of thrill, this ride gets compared to Soaring a lot, which I'd say is fair, but I would argue that it's more thrilling than Soaring, and I think it's because you're on a bike type of vehicle, and there's also a sense of danger as you're riding around. You encounter different alien life. You make some tight air maneuvers. There's this one scene where you almost like do a corkscrew in the air, which it sounds a lot more intense than it feels, but it does feel that, you know, sensation of you flipping, but nothing too crazy. Generally speaking, if you can ride Soaring or Star Tours, you can probably ride this ride, no problem. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. If I was only counting the ride itself, Flight of Passage would not do well in terms of theming because it's just a screen, but the queue and the whole land really is just so breathtaking. When it comes to which land is better, you've probably heard the debate of, you know, Diagon Alley versus Pandora. I think it really just depends on what environments you like better. If you're more of a city person, you probably lean more towards Diagon Alley. But if you like, you know, nature and wildlife and sci-fi, you probably will lean more towards Pandora. For me, I think Diagon Alley has more stuff to do. There's more kinetic energy. There's more shops. There's more atmosphere, I think. But Pandora has an incredible restaurant and an extra ride that Diagon Alley doesn't have. So for me, it really just depends how I'm feeling on what day. But anyways, back to the theming. For Flight of Passage, the queue has 3 different sections. You have like the caves and mountains portion, and then you have a bioluminescent forest section, and then you have a laboratory section. And it really does an excellent job of making you feel like you are on another planet. It's a 10 out of 10 for theming. Personal preference. So as you can probably tell, I love this ride. However, I do have 2 gripes with Flight of Passage. Number 1, the actor in the pre-show is not very good. The one who plays the scientist, I don't know if he's just a bad actor or the writing's bad, but he's just not a convincing scientist, and it's odd that we're expected to believe that this guy was hand selected to go to another planet to study life. He just seems so awkward and not confident in his work, and you might be thinking, you know, you're thinking too much about this, but hey, I'm making theme park videos, so of course I think too much about this. And if you're watching this, you've probably thought about it too. And then the second thing is the glasses are sometimes blurry on the end, so I have to like physically turn my head to see the whole screen, which I don't know, maybe they did that on purpose to get you to do that, but I just don't I don't like it. So I wish they made glasses to where you just saw the whole screen. But other than that, you know, this is almost a perfect ride, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. With all that talk about Diagon Alley, let's go ahead and move over to Universal Studios and talk about Escape from Gringotts. Like Rise of the Resistance, you don't have a whole lot of physical thrills with this ride. You do have a drop at the beginning, but it's small. You do have different people chasing you through Gringotts Bank with different elements sprinkled throughout this ride. When I first rode this ride, I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea what was going to happen next. There's an element at the very end, spoiler alert, if you don't want it ruined for you, just skip ahead. But there is an element at the end where you just go through a screen and you follow a dragon, and it's just like the coolest thing. I love how they did that, and so I'm going to give Escape from Gringotts a 5 out of 10 in terms of thrill. Now let's move on to theming. Just as immersive as the land it's in, the ride sells you on the idea that you are going deep underground through the vaults of Gringotts. From the goblins you see working to the elevator that you take deep underground, the ride goes all out to immerse you in the story. The whole land draws you in and points you to the bank. The architecture, as well as the shops in Diagon Alley, are just also interesting. I'm going to give this one a 10 out of 10 for personal preference. Now let's go check out some Raptors on the Velocicoaster. Island of Adventure's newest coaster is 4,700 feet of track and reaches a height of 155 feet. With 4 loops, 2 launches, and a top speed of 70 miles per hour, you can bet this ride is thrilling. Now, I live near Cedar Point in Ohio, which is the park that is known for having the most thrilling, record-breaking coasters in the world. I would say that while Velocicoaster is thrilling, it's not punishing. It's very smooth, and the only part where I really felt it in my stomach was that Heartline roll at the end of the ride. Not to mention the added thrill of being chased by raptors. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 for thrill. Now let's talk about theming. This is the dilemma for this ride and really the whole land that it takes place in. The ride is set to Jurassic World, so it's sporting the gray and blue colors from the newer movies, but the land is technically themed to Jurassic Park. So that's going to hurt this ride big time for me. While if you're just looking at the ride, the entrance is great. They have this, statue of velociraptors. It's in this modern looking building themed to be an attraction inside Jurassic World. And, the roller coaster is a roller coaster in the paddock with the dinosaurs. It's clever theming. I do wish that there was one animatronic raptor on the ride itself, but we got some in the queue, so I guess that's okay. It's a shame that the ride blocks the Discovery Center a little bit, and so the photos aren't as cool as they used to be, but it is what it is. I'll give it an 8 out of 10 for theming. They have to pick a theme, either Jurassic Park or Jurassic World. I don't really care which one they pick, but they need to be consistent. In California, they rethemed the River Adventure to Jurassic World, and I think it's great. So let's bring it to Florida or give the Velocicoaster a paint job. It's that easy. And for personal preference, this ride is often given the title of best roller coaster in Florida, and I have to agree. A thrilling coaster with some great moments and the added thrill of being surrounded by dinosaurs is just a unique experience that only Universal can dream up. Gotta give it a 9 out of 10. And lastly, we have Hagrid's Magical Creature Motorbike Adventure. Hagrid's has 7 launches and reaches a max speed of 50 miles per hour. You can either ride on a motorbike or the sidecar. There's no big drops or inversions, but it really leans into those turns, which makes it really fun. The thing that gives this ride some extra points is all the different elements we see sprinkled throughout the ride. I'm going to share some in a second, so if you don't want to know about them, just skip on ahead. But when you go backwards after your bike stalls, when you fall down, and when you free fall down, when you're trapped in the devil's snare, it's such a cool effect. So because of all that, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10 for thrill. Now let's talk about theming. In the queue, you pass by Hagrid's hut and explore the ruins of an old cathedral where you take your field trip with Hagrid into the Forbidden Forest. You walk by a lot of cages and remnants from some of the magical creatures that you're going to encounter on the ride. I recommend riding this ride at night if possible. It really feels a lot more spookier and feels more like the Forbidden Forest. On the ride, you see a bunch of animatronics and figures, including a blast-ended Shroot from the books and Hagrid himself. The Forbidden Forest is such a cool location to put a ride. So many iconic scenes from the books and movies take place there, and now we can finally experience our own story in the forest. And so I gotta give it a 10 out of 10 for theming. And lastly, personal preference. I probably spend the most amount of time when I'm at Universal inside the Wizarding World. The Ministry of Magic land at Epic Universe that's coming out next year is my most anticipated land. So of course Hagrid's for me is a special ride, especially after the loss of Robbie Coltrane, who played Hagrid in the movies. The ride just hits different. Hogsmeade and Diagon Alley really do have a special bit of magic to them. The people who built them, along with J.K. Rowling herself, just took extra care when creating these worlds. And Hagrid's is just another great immersive adventure to go on when you find yourself in the Wizarding World. So I gotta give it a 10 out of 10. After this completely unbiased test, let's see how these rides stacked up against each other. In last place, we have Guardians of the Galaxy with a score of 21. In 5th place, Rise of the Resistance with a score of 22. Flight of Passage with a score of 23. And it turns out 3rd and 2nd place are tied with a score of 25. Escape from Gringotts and Velocicoaster. And number 1, the best theme park ride between the two parks, Hagrid's Magical Creature Motorbike Adventure. And the top 3 spots are Universal, which means as of right now, it is my humble opinion that Universal is beating Disney in the theme park wars. And Disney should be very afraid of Universal next year with the opening of Epic Universe. Now, some of you may call me a Universal shill, but if you look back at my last Disney video, I was very positive with most of their rides. I want Disney to succeed, but the reality is I don't think they will, because their priority is no longer making good rides. It's being politically correct and making sure that nobody's offended. Yikes. But anyways, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.